English in Fluency. Hosted by Alex B., One English Listening Practice. Understand how speakers express prohibition. Catch what is not allowed clearly. Hey, welcome back. I'm Alex, and you're listening to English in Fluency, the place where real English starts to feel less scary and a lot more natural. So, before we get started today, I just want to say something. If you've ever been in a conversation in English and someone said something like, "You're not supposed to do that," or "This is strictly off limits," and you just kind of froze for a second, not because you didn't hear the words, but because you weren't totally sure what they meant in that moment, then this episode is genuinely made for you. Today, we are diving into one of the most practical and honestly underrated areas of English communication: how native speakers express prohibition. That means how they say what is not allowed, what you cannot do, what is forbidden. And trust me, there are so many ways people say this in English, and understanding all of them will change how well you follow conversations, how well you understand rules, and how confidently you navigate the real world in English. So, let's go. Stay with me from the beginning to the end, because by the time we finish, you're going to feel a whole new kind of confident. Let's do this. All right, so let's start by thinking about why this matters. Imagine you're at work, or you're traveling, or you're in a store, or maybe you're watching a TV show in English, and someone says, "You really shouldn't be doing that here." Now, on the surface, that sounds like advice, but depending on the tone and the situation, it could actually mean, "This is against the rules. You are not allowed to do that." And if you miss that meaning, if you think it's just a gentle suggestion, you could end up in an awkward or even serious situation. This is why learning the language of prohibition, the language of not allowed, is so important at the B1 level and beyond. It's not just grammar, it's real communication. It's how people talk to each other every single day. Now, let me introduce you to our story for today. We're going to follow a few people through their daily lives, and through their conversations, you're going to hear prohibition expressed in all kinds of natural ways. You'll hear it at work, at school, in a neighborhood, in a hospital, at a library, and in a restaurant. Every single scene is designed to give you real listening practice. So as you listen, don't just follow the story. Listen for the language. Listen for the words and phrases that show something is not allowed. I'll point them out and explain them as we go, and I'll also give you moments to practice. Ready? Here we go. Our story begins with a woman named Clara. Clara is 29 years old, and she just started a new job at a marketing company in the city. She's excited, a little nervous, and she really wants to make a good impression. On her very first morning, her manager, a friendly but serious man named Daniel, is giving her a tour of the office. As they walk through the open workspace, Daniel stops near a row of desks and says, "Oh, one thing. You must not access the client files on the shared drive without getting clearance first. It's a strict company policy." Clara nods and says, "Of course, I understand completely." But inside, she's thinking, "Okay, noted. That's off limits until I get the go-ahead." Now, let's pause right there. Did you catch the prohibition in Daniel's sentence? He said, "You must not access the client files without clearance." The phrase "must not," sometimes written as "mustn't," is one of the strongest ways to express prohibition in English. When someone says, "You must not do something," They are telling you clearly and firmly that this is not allowed. It's not a suggestion. It's a rule. You must not take photos in this area. You must not share your password with anyone. You must not enter this room without permission. These are all strong prohibitions. The word must itself carries a sense of obligation or necessity. So when you add not to it, you get a very clear message. This is absolutely not permitted. Pay attention to this structure because you'll hear it in professional settings, in legal language, on warning signs, and anywhere rules are being communicated clearly and seriously. Clara spends the first part of her morning getting settled in. She meets some of her new colleagues. One of them, a cheerful woman named Priya, comes over to her desk and whispers with a smile, "Hey, just so you know, you're not allowed to eat at your desk. Daniel is kind of strict about that. He says it's unprofessional." Clara laughs quietly and says, "Good to know. I almost brought my sandwich in." Priya grins and says, "Yeah, I learned that the hard way on my first week." Okay, let's look at what Priya said. You're not allowed to eat at your desk. The phrase, "not allowed to," is one of the most common and natural ways to express prohibition in everyday spoken English. It's a little softer than must not, but it still means the same thing. This is not permitted. You're not allowed to park here. Children are not allowed to enter without an adult. You're not allowed to use your phone during the test. These are all very normal, real sentences that you'll hear every day. What I love about not allowed to is that it's flexible. You can say, "I'm not allowed to," "He's not allowed to," "They're not allowed to." It works for everyone. And it sounds completely natural in any situation, whether you're talking about a workplace rule, a school rule, or something as simple as a house rule at a friend's place. Now, let me also point out the way Priya communicated this. She didn't say it like a robot reading a rule book. She whispered, she smiled, she said, "Just so you know," at the start, which is a friendly, casual way of introducing information, almost like a little warning between friends. And then she used a personal story at the end. "I learned that the hard way, to make Clara feel at ease." This is something real people do. They soften rules and prohibitions with friendly language, humor, and personal experience. So when you're listening to English, don't just listen to the key words. Listen to the whole package, the tone, the context, the little phrases that come before and after. They tell you so much about how serious something is and what kind of relationship the speakers have. Later that same day, Clara needs to make a phone call, so she steps into one of the small meeting rooms. She doesn't realize that the room is booked. A few minutes later, a colleague named Tom knocks on the glass door and says, "Hey, sorry to interrupt. This room is reserved right now. You can't use it for personal calls, I'm afraid. You'd need to book it in advance if you want to use it." Clara apologizes immediately, gathers her things, and steps out. Let's look at what Tom said. You can't use it for personal calls. The word can't, which is the short form of cannot, is another extremely common way to express prohibition. It's used all the time in spoken English. You can't smoke in here. You can't bring food into the cinema. You can't park on this street between 8 and 10 in the morning. Can't often sounds less formal than must not, and it's used in a wider range of situations, from casual conversations to more serious ones. Tom also said, "I'm afraid," after the prohibition, which is a polite softener. It doesn't mean he's actually scared. It's just a way of saying, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's the rule." People add phrases like, "I'm afraid," "unfortunately," and "I'm sorry," but before prohibitions to make them sound less harsh and more polite. Let's move on now and follow a different character. This is Marcus, a 16-year-old student at a secondary school. It's a Tuesday morning, and Marcus is arriving at school a little late. He rushes through the front gate and notices a new sign that's been put up near the entrance. The sign reads, "Students are forbidden from using mobile phones on school grounds during school hours." Marcus sighs and pulls his phone out of his pocket to check the time, then quickly puts it away when he notices the deputy head, a stern woman named Mrs. Okafor, standing nearby. She looks at him and says firmly, "You know the rules, Marcus. Phones are banned during school hours. Put it away, please." Now we have two new prohibition phrases to look at. First, from the sign, "Students are forbidden from using mobile phones." The word forbidden is formal and strong. It's the kind of word you see on official signs, in legal documents, in rules and regulations. Photography is forbidden in this gallery. Entry is forbidden without authorization. Smoking is strictly forbidden on these premises. When you see or hear forbidden, you know this is a serious rule. It's not open to interpretation. It's not just a preference, it's a hard restriction. The structure is usually, "Someone is forbidden from doing something," or "Something is forbidden." Both forms are correct, and both are commonly used. The second phrase is from Mrs. Okafor. "Phones are banned." Banned is another strong word. When something is banned, it means it has been officially prohibited, often by someone in authority or by a formal decision. Plastic bags are banned in this city. That book was banned for many years. Dogs are banned from this beach during summer months. Banned sounds very official and final. If you hear that something is banned, you should understand that this is not a gentle suggestion. It is a firm rule, and there may be real consequences for breaking it. Marcus goes to his first class of the day, which is an art lesson. His art teacher, a young enthusiastic man named Mr. Serrano, is explaining the rules for using the supply room. He says, "Right, everyone listen up. You're welcome to use the supply room to get materials, but there are a few things to keep in mind. You cannot take more than 2 sheets of canvas at a time. You are not to touch the oil paints unless I've specifically given you permission. Those are for the advanced group only. And please, whatever you do, don't go in there during break time. The room is locked during breaks, so there's no point trying." Wow, there's a lot to unpack in what Mr. Serrano just said. Let's go through it together. First, you cannot take more than 2 sheets of canvas. We already know "cannot" expresses prohibition. But notice here it's being used to set a limit. It's not just, "You can't do this thing entirely." It's, "You can't go beyond this amount." This is a really important nuance. Prohibition isn't always about banning something completely. Sometimes it's about restricting how much or how often. Listen for that in your daily English. Next, you are not to touch the oil paints. This is a slightly formal structure. You are not to do something, and it's used to mean that someone has no permission to do something, often because of a specific reason or decision. You are not to enter this area. She is not to be disturbed. They are not to leave the building. It sounds a bit like a command, and it often comes from someone in a position of authority. It's a clear and firm prohibition without being aggressive. It's the kind of thing a parent might say, or a teacher, or a supervisor. And then finally, don't go in there during break time. Simple, direct. Don't is one of the most natural and common ways to give a prohibition, especially in spoken English. Don't touch that. Don't run in the corridor. Don't use this entrance after 6 o'clock. Don't is informal and immediate. It gets the message across quickly and clearly. And when someone says don't, especially with a tone of urgency or firmness, you know they really mean it. Mr. Serrano softened the whole thing at the end by adding, "So there's no point trying," which is a conversational way of explaining why the prohibition exists, because the room is locked anyway. This makes the prohibition feel more logical and less arbitrary, which is something real speakers do all the time. Now, let's shift the scene. We're going to spend some time with a man named Gerald, who is 52 years old and recently moved into a new apartment building. He's trying to settle in and understand the building's rules. On his second day there, his neighbor, a retired woman named Betty, comes over to introduce herself and gives him a friendly heads-up about a few things. "Welcome to the building," she says cheerfully. "It's a really nice place, honestly. Just a few things you should know. No loud music after 10 at night. That's a firm rule, and the building manager takes it very seriously. You're also not permitted to hang anything on the exterior walls or the balcony railings. And the parking spaces in the underground garage? Those are assigned, so you're not supposed to park in someone else's spot." Let's look at the new phrases here. No loud music after 10 at night. This is what we call a no plus noun prohibition. It's very direct, very clean, and very common in English, especially for rules and signs. No smoking, no entry, no photography, no mobile phones, no food or drink. These short, sharp phrases communicate prohibition in the most efficient way possible. You don't need a full sentence. You just need no plus the thing that's not allowed. And depending on the context, a sign, a verbal warning, a rule, it lands with real clarity. Next, you're not permitted to hang anything on the exterior walls. Not permitted to is similar to not allowed to, but it sounds slightly more official and formal. You often hear it in legal or regulatory contexts, but it also comes up in everyday speech when someone wants to sound precise and authoritative. You're not permitted to bring outside food into the venue. Visitors are not permitted to stay overnight. Employees are not permitted to discuss salary with clients. When you hear "not permitted," you know this is a formal or official restriction. And finally, you're not supposed to park in someone else's spot. Now, this one is really interesting because "not supposed to" sits in a slightly different place compared to the other phrases we've looked at. It often implies that the rule exists and that most people follow it, but the tone is a bit more conversational. Like, "This is just what you're expected to do or not do." It often carries a sense of "this is understood by everyone," rather than "this is written in a legal document." You're not supposed to cut in line. He's not supposed to be in this part of the building. We're not supposed to talk about that in front of the clients. It's a soft but clear prohibition. And importantly, when someone says, "you're not supposed to," they might also be hinting that people sometimes break this rule. But they still shouldn't. It has a slightly more human, slightly more informal feel. Gerald thanks Betty for all the information and promises to keep the rules in mind. He also adds, with a little laugh, "Good to know about the parking. I almost parked in a random spot this morning." Betty laughs too and says, "Oh yes, you would have heard about that very quickly." This kind of exchange is so natural and so real. Rules and prohibitions don't always come in strict, serious conversations. Sometimes they come in friendly small talk between neighbors. And the ability to catch prohibition language even when it's wrapped in light, friendly conversation is a real skill. So keep your ears open. In real life, prohibition doesn't always sound like a court ruling. It often sounds just like this. Let's move on to a hospital setting now, because hospitals have some of the most important prohibitions of all. And they also show you how prohibition language can vary depending on the urgency of the situation. We're going to follow a character named Sophie, who is 24 and visiting her grandfather in the hospital. She arrives at the reception, and a nurse at the front desk, a kind man named Elliot, greets her. She asks where her grandfather is, and he gives her directions. Then he adds, "Before you go in, mobile phones must be switched off or on silent near the cardiac ward. It can interfere with the equipment. Also, no more than 2 visitors at a time in the room, please, and outside food is strictly prohibited. He's on a special diet, and we need to be very careful about what he eats." There's so much good language in Elliot's instructions. Let's take it one piece at a time. Mobile phones must be switched off, or on silent, near the cardiac ward. Here again we have must, and notice the reason is given immediately. It can interfere with the equipment. In hospitals, the reason for a prohibition is often just as important as the prohibition itself, because it helps people understand the urgency. When you hear must plus a reason in a medical or safety context, pay very close attention. This is serious. No more than 2 visitors at a time in the room. This is a quantity-based prohibition, very similar to Mr. Serrano's no more than 2 sheets of canvas from earlier. No more than sets an upper limit. No more than 10 people in the elevator. No more than 1 bag per person. No more than 30 minutes in the consultation room. These are restrictions on quantity or number, and they're a common way of expressing what's not allowed in terms of how much. Outside food is strictly prohibited. The word strictly here is an intensifier. It makes the prohibition even stronger. Strictly means there are absolutely no exceptions, no gray areas, no flexibility. Strictly prohibited is very serious. You'll often hear or see it in formal, official, or high-stakes contexts. Legal documents, safety notices, medical instructions. Strictly no entry. Strictly forbidden. This is strictly against company policy. When you hear strictly attached to a prohibition, you know they really, really mean it. Sophie goes in to see her grandfather, a cheerful elderly man named Frederick. He's in good spirits and very happy to see her. After a while, Sophie reaches into her bag and pulls out a chocolate bar she brought for him. Frederick's eyes light up, but then he shakes his head with a smile and says, "Better not, love. They've been very clear. I'm not to have sugar. Doctor's orders." Sophie laughs and says, I know. I just thought maybe." And Frederick winks and says, "Don't let the nurse catch you with that." Frederick's phrase, "I'm not to have sugar," is one we've already seen. Not to do something as a prohibition. But what makes this moment special is the human element. He's not upset about it. He's not lecturing Sophie. He's smiling. He's using the phrase, doctor's orders, which is a very common English expression, meaning, I was told by a doctor, and I have no choice but to follow it. And he's even joking about the nurse catching them. This is real human communication. Real prohibition language wrapped in warmth and humor. And the ability to understand all of this, the rule, the context, the emotion, the jokes, that is true fluency. Now, let's visit a different scene entirely. We're at a public library in a quiet neighborhood. A young student named Jonah, about 19 years old, is there to study for his university exams. The librarian at the desk, a soft-spoken woman named Miriam, is telling a group of new visitors about the library's rules. She speaks gently, but clearly. Welcome to the Clearwater Community Library. We ask that all visitors respect our quiet policy. Talking loudly is not permitted in the main reading hall. Mobile phones are to be kept on silent at all times. You may not bring hot drinks or food into the library. Cold water in a sealed bottle is fine. Children under 12 must be accompanied by an adult at all times and are not to be left unattended. And finally, books may not be removed from the building without being properly checked out. Thank you all so much. Let's examine Miriam's language carefully, because it's a beautiful example of how prohibition is communicated in a formal but warm way. Notice that she starts with, "We ask that all visitors respect our quiet policy." This is a very polite way of beginning. It frames everything as a request rather than a demand, even though what follows are actual rules. This is a common technique in customer-facing settings. It softens the whole message. You may not bring hot drinks or food into the library. May not is interesting. We often think of may as a word for giving permission. You may come in, you may sit down. But may not is a prohibition, and it's on the more formal end of the spectrum. Visitors may not enter after closing time. Students may not use this entrance. Members may not transfer their membership to another person. It's polite, it's professional, and it's very commonly used in written rules and spoken official communication. Children are not to be left unattended. This is the passive form of not to do something. It shifts the focus from the person doing something to the situation itself. Bags are not to be left unattended. This door is not to be opened during the performance. Animals are not to be kept in the rooms. The passive form sounds very official and impersonal, which is often used deliberately to make a rule sound like it applies to everyone equally, not like someone is being personally singled out. Books may not be removed from the building without being properly checked out. This one combines may not with a condition, without being properly checked out. This is important because it shows that the prohibition is not absolute. You can take books out, but only if you follow the correct procedure. This kind of conditional prohibition is very common in real life. You may not enter without a valid ticket. Employees may not work overtime without prior approval. Food may not be served without a health certificate. Listen for these conditions because they tell you what you can do once the condition is met. Jonah settles in and starts studying. After about an hour, a teenage boy sitting nearby is listening to music through tiny earbuds, but his music is just barely audible. An older man sitting at the next table leans over and whispers, "Excuse me, I can just hear your music. You're not really supposed to have sound coming from your headphones in here. The boy apologizes, adjusts his earbuds, and turns the volume down completely. The older man didn't quote a rule. He didn't say, "It says in the library policy that." He just used, "You're not really supposed to," which is that soft, conversational prohibition phrase we explored earlier. And the little word, "really," softens it even more. It's almost like he's saying, "I know you're not trying to break the rules, but..." This is what polite prohibition looks like in practice. It's not aggressive. It's not confrontational. It's respectful and quiet. And understanding that this is a prohibition, even when it's delivered so gently, is a key listening skill. Let's now head to a restaurant scene. It's a Saturday evening, and a couple named Natalie and Owen are out for dinner at a nice restaurant. It's their anniversary. The waiter, a polished and professional young man named Vincent, is explaining the evening's menu to them. At one point, Owen asks if he can substitute the side dish in one of the set menus. Vincent smiles apologetically and says, "I'm afraid substitutions aren't allowed on the set menus, sir. Those menus are priced as a complete package. However, if you'd prefer, you're very welcome to order from the à la carte menu, where you'd have complete flexibility. Substitutions aren't allowed on the set menus." Simple, clear, and polite. Aren't allowed. The negative of are allowed is exactly the same as not allowed to, but structured slightly differently to fit the thing being restricted rather than the person being restricted. Compare, "You are not allowed to make substitutions," versus "substitutions are not allowed." Both mean the same thing. Both are very natural. In customer-facing settings, the second form is often preferred because it feels less like you're blaming the customer and more like you're describing a general policy. And notice how Vincent followed the prohibition with an alternative. However, if you'd prefer, you're very welcome to order from the à la carte menu. This is such a natural and gracious thing to do. In real English communication, when someone tells you what you can't do, they will often, especially in service settings, immediately offer you something you can do. Listen for this pattern. It's very common, and it tells you that the speaker wants to be helpful even while communicating a restriction. Natalie decides she'd like to order a particular wine she enjoyed at this restaurant before. She asks Vincent if they still have it. Vincent pauses, checks something on his tablet, and says, "I'm afraid that particular wine is no longer on our list. We discontinued it last season. We do have something very similar, though, that I think you'd really enjoy." Natalie smiles and says, "That sounds perfect." The word discontinued here is worth noting. When something is discontinued, it means it has been stopped. It's no longer available. This isn't exactly a prohibition in the traditional sense, but it is a way of communicating that something is not possible or not permitted. In this case, not because of a rule, but because it simply doesn't exist anymore. In real conversations, you'll often encounter prohibitions and restrictions that aren't stated using the classic grammar structures. Sometimes people say things like, "That's not available," "We don't do that here," "That's not something we offer," or "That's been removed." And all of these communicate the same fundamental idea. This is not possible for you here and now. Let's take another pause and do some listening practice together. I'm going to say several sentences, and your job is to identify the phrase that expresses prohibition in each one. I'll say the sentence, give you a moment to think, and then I'll highlight the key phrase. Ready? Here we go. Passengers must not open the emergency door except in the case of a real emergency. Did you catch it? Must not open. That's your prohibition. Clear, firm, formal. This is a rule that could save lives. Photography is strictly forbidden inside the courtroom. The key phrase is strictly forbidden, and the word strictly makes it even stronger. You absolutely cannot take photos in there. You can't take more than one item from the sample tray. Can't take. Simple, everyday prohibition with a quantity restriction. He's not allowed to drive yet because his license is suspended. Not allowed to drive. Clear prohibition based on a legal reason. This medication may not be taken with alcohol. May not be taken. Formal, passive, medical prohibition. Very serious. You're not supposed to use the staff entrance if you're a visitor. Not supposed to. Softer, more conversational, implying a known expectation. No entry after 9 p.m. The classic no plus noun sign-style prohibition. Please don't lean against the glass. Don't lean. Direct, spoken, casual prohibition. They're not to be contacted during the review period. Not to be contacted. Formal, passive prohibition. Outside beverages are banned from the premises. Banned. Official, final, no exceptions. How did you do? If you caught most of those, you're doing brilliantly. If some of them were tricky, that's completely fine. Keep listening, and they'll start to feel more and more natural over time. Now, let's return to our characters for a little while longer. We're back with Clara, our marketing professional. It's been a few weeks since she started her new job, and she's been doing really well. One afternoon, she's in a meeting with a client, a sharp, efficient woman named Diana, who works for a large retail company. Diana is explaining her company's strict media policy. So, just so we're all on the same page, Diana says in a business-like tone, your agency must not share any creative assets publicly before the official launch date. Even showing work-in-progress material to outside parties is a violation of our NDA. Additionally, staff members are not to discuss campaign details in open or shared workspaces. This is non-negotiable. Must not share. There's our strong prohibition again, in a corporate legal context. A violation of our NDA. An NDA is a non-disclosure agreement, a legal document that prohibits people from sharing certain information. This is important vocabulary in professional English. When something violates an agreement or a policy, it means it breaks the rules. It's prohibited. Staff members are not to discuss campaign details. Another firm instruction using not to. And finally, this is non-negotiable. This phrase is incredibly important in English. Non-negotiable means there's no room for discussion, no flexibility, no exceptions. When someone says something is non-negotiable, they're communicating the highest level of prohibition in a conversational tone. You will hear this in business settings a lot, and it's very important to recognize it. Clara nods seriously throughout Diana's explanation and takes careful notes. Later, when the meeting is over, she tells her colleague Priya about it. Diana is intense, Clara says, half laughing. She basically said we can't breathe without checking the NDA first. Priya laughs and says, I know, but honestly, it's clear guidelines. Better than ambiguity. What Clara said, we can't breathe without checking the NDA first, is of course an exaggeration, a figure of speech. But it's a great example of how native speakers use hyperbole to describe strict prohibitions in a casual, humorous way. They won't let us do anything. It's like we're not allowed to exist without permission. You can't even sneeze in there without filling out a form. These are all exaggerated ways of saying, the rules here are very strict. If you hear this kind of language, smile. And know that the speaker is just using humor to describe a situation full of prohibitions. Let's visit Marcus again. He's now in a history class, and his teacher, an energetic, passionate man named Mr. Byrne, is talking about historical examples of prohibition. He says, throughout history, governments and authorities have used prohibition as a tool of control. In certain periods, books were forbidden. In others, entire languages were banned. People were not permitted to practice their religion freely. Women were prohibited from voting, from owning property, from holding certain jobs. These were not just rules. They were instruments of power. And understanding this history helps us understand why we must always question prohibitions and ask, who benefits from this rule, and is it just? This is a beautiful moment in our story because it shows that prohibition language appears not just in everyday life, but also in serious historical and political discourse. Notice how Mr. Byrne uses a range of prohibition phrases: forbidden, banned, not permitted to, prohibited from, all in quick succession. This is natural in speech. Real speakers don't stick to just one phrase. They vary their language, they layer it. And as a listener, your job is to recognize all of these forms and understand that they all point to the same core meaning. Something was not allowed. Marcus raises his hand and asks, "Sir, is there a difference between something being banned and something being forbidden?" Mr. Byrne nods appreciatively and says, "Great question, Marcus. In practice, they're very similar. Both mean something is not allowed. Banned often implies an official act, a law, a policy, a decision made by authority. Forbidden can be broader. It can come from a law, a religion, a culture, a personal code. Both are strong prohibitions. The key is context. Where does the prohibition come from? Who enforces it? That will tell you a lot about which word fits best. This is exactly the kind of nuance that separates B1 learners from B2 and above. It's not just about knowing that a word means not allowed. It's about understanding the shades of meaning, the register, the context, the source of authority behind the prohibition. Keep developing this sensitivity, and you will find your English understanding improving enormously. Now, let's bring all of our characters together for one final scene. It's a community meeting at a local neighborhood center. Clara, Marcus, Gerald, Sophie, Jonah, Natalie, and Owen are all there, along with a number of their neighbors. The meeting has been called to discuss some new rules for the use of the community garden and shared outdoor space. The community coordinator, a warm and organized woman named Felicity, is leading the discussion. She has a list of proposed rules that she's sharing with the group. "Thank you all so much for being here," Felicity begins. "I know you're all busy, so I'll keep this as smooth as possible. We've had a few issues in the garden lately, and together we've put together a set of community guidelines that we hope everyone will find fair and reasonable. So let me go through them. First, residents must not plant anything in sections that haven't been assigned to them. Each family or household has a designated bed, And planting in someone else's space, even with good intentions, causes confusion and sometimes damages plants. Second, the use of chemical pesticides is banned. We've voted for an organic-only policy across the whole garden. This was a decision made by the community last year, and it's still firmly in place. Third, garden tools stored in the communal shed are not to be removed from the property. If you need to borrow something overnight, you need to sign it out with me or with one of the garden coordinators. Fourth, children are welcome, but they are not to run through or play in the planting beds. The raised beds especially are quite fragile. Fifth, no bonfires or open flames are permitted anywhere in the garden area. If you'd like to use the barbecue in the social zone, that's allowed, but open fires are absolutely not. Sixth, dogs are not permitted in the garden area during the morning cultivation hours. That's between 7 and 10 a.m. After 10, they're welcome on leash. And finally, any disputes between residents must not be handled aggressively or confrontationally. We have a conflict resolution process, and I'd ask everyone to use it. What an incredible list! Let's appreciate for a moment how many different prohibition structures Felicity used, and how naturally she moved between them. Must not plant, is banned, are not to be removed, are not to run, no bonfires are permitted, not permitted in the garden area, must not be handled aggressively. Every single one of those is a prohibition, but each one is expressed differently, and each one fits its context. Felicity isn't reading from a law book, she's talking to her neighbors. She sounds warm, organized, and reasonable, and yet the prohibitions are completely clear. This is real English. This is fluency in action. After she finishes, several people have questions and comments. Gerald raises his hand and asks, "Just to clarify, when you say dogs aren't permitted during cultivation hours, does that mean absolutely no dogs, or just that they can't be off-leash?" Felicity smiles and says, "Absolutely no dogs during that period, even on a leash. It tends to distract people who are working, and there's a safety concern around the tools." Gerald nods and says, "Fair enough. This little exchange is worth noting." Gerald used "aren't permitted" in his question, mirroring the language Felicity had just used. This is called accommodation in linguistics, and it's something real speakers do naturally. They pick up on the language the other person is using and reflect it back. It helps the conversation flow smoothly and shows that you're listening. As an English learner, you can do this too. When someone uses a prohibition phrase with you, try using the same phrase when you respond or ask a follow-up question. It will make your English sound much more natural. Natalie raises her hand next and says, "What about the communal seating area? My kids love playing near the benches there after school. Is that allowed, or?" Felicity reassures her, "Oh, that's absolutely fine. The restrictions are specifically about the planting beds and the cultivation zones. The seating area and the grass section are open to everyone all day." Natalie smiles with relief and says, "Perfect. Good to know." This is a great example of how prohibitions often need to be clarified and contextualized. Not everything is forbidden everywhere. Rules usually apply to specific places, specific times, specific circumstances. As a listener, you need to track not just what is prohibited, but where, when, and to whom it applies. In Felicity's list, some prohibitions were universal, like no chemical pesticides, while others were time-bound, like no dogs before 10 a.m., and others were space-specific, like no open flames in the garden area. Keeping track of these details is part of advanced listening comprehension. At the end of the meeting, Felicity thanks everyone for their participation and says, "I think what makes this community special is that we all actually care about the space. Rules work best when people understand the reason behind them, not just the restriction itself. So if anyone ever has a question about why a rule exists, my door is open." There's a warm round of applause, and people start chatting as they head out. What a wonderful note to end that scene on. Felicity's final words say something profound about prohibition itself. Rules aren't just arbitrary obstacles. They exist for reasons. And in English, as you've seen throughout this whole episode, when people communicate prohibitions well, they often include those reasons. You must not do this because. This is banned because. We ask that you don't do this because. The reason is part of the message. And understanding the reason deepens your understanding of the rule and of the language. Now, as we wrap up our story and our listening practice, let's do a full review. We've covered a lot today, and I want to make sure everything is clear and well organized in your mind. Let's go through all the main prohibition phrases we explored, from the strongest and most formal to the softest and most conversational. At the very top, the most serious and formal prohibitions: must not and mustn't, strictly forbidden, strictly prohibited, banned, and forbidden. These are the phrases you'll see on warning signs, in legal documents, in official policies, and in very serious spoken contexts. When you hear these, take them seriously. There are no exceptions. A step down in formality, but still clear and official. Not permitted to, may not, are not to be. Passive form. Prohibited from, not allowed to. These are commonly used in professional settings, in formal announcements, in workplace policies, in hospital or school rules. They are still firm prohibitions, just a little more polished and less aggressive in tone. Then we have the everyday conversational prohibitions. Can't, cannot, you're not supposed to, you're not really supposed to, don't, no plus noun. These are what you'll hear in casual conversation, in friendly warnings between people, in verbal instructions from colleagues or neighbors. They're natural, easy, and extremely common. Don't underestimate them just because they sound informal. They are just as much a prohibition as anything else. And remember, real speakers combine these with softeners like, "I'm afraid," "unfortunately," "just so you know," "I'm sorry, but," and "to be honest with you." They add reasons. They offer alternatives. They use humor and warmth. They use hyperbole. All of this is part of how prohibition is communicated in real, living English. All right, now let's do one final practice exercise. I'm going to describe several situations, and I want you to think about which prohibition phrase would fit best. There's no single right answer. Sometimes several phrases could work. But try to think about the tone, the formality, and the context. Here we go. A sign in a museum near a priceless painting. Which phrase would you expect to see? If you thought photography is strictly forbidden, or do not touch the artwork, or flash photography is not permitted, you're right on track. Formal, firm, official. A friend telling another friend about a rule at their new gym. Which phrase would you expect? Maybe something like, you're not supposed to bring your own weights, or you can't use the sauna without a towel, or they don't allow outside drinks in the gym area. Casual, friendly, conversational. A doctor giving instructions to a patient about their medication. What would that sound like? Probably something like, "You must not take this medication with alcohol," or "This medication may not be combined with blood thinners," or "You are not to drive for at least 4 hours after taking this." Serious, medical, clear. A neighbor politely asking someone to be quieter. What would that sound like? Something like, "I just wanted to mention, we're not really supposed to play music after 11, or I think there's a rule about noise after 10, or I don't want to be a pain, but I don't think we're allowed to have parties on weekdays." Soft, apologetic, friendly. A teacher explaining a rule to students during an exam. What would that sound like? "You may not use your notes during this test. Phones must be switched off and put away. You cannot leave the room until the exam is over. No talking, please." Formal, direct, institutional. See how different each situation is, and how the language shifts to match? That's the beauty and the complexity of English. One idea, prohibition, expressed in so many different ways depending on who's speaking, where they are, who they're talking to, and what the stakes are. Before I let you go today, I want to leave you with something to do. In the next 24 hours, pay attention to how prohibition is expressed around you. If you're watching a show or a film in English, listen for the prohibition phrases we covered. If you're reading something in English, an email, an article, a sign, a notice, notice how "not allowed," "forbidden," "must not," and all the rest show up in real writing. And if you're brave enough, try to use one of these phrases yourself in a real or imaginary conversation. Try saying, "You're not supposed to park there," or "That's strictly forbidden," or "They don't allow that here," and feel how it sits on your tongue, how it sounds, how it feels, because that's how language becomes part of you. Not just understood from the outside, but lived from the inside. And if this episode helped you, if something clicked that didn't click before, if you heard a phrase and thought, "Oh, so that's what that means," then I want to know about it. Leave a comment. Share the episode. Tell a friend who's learning English, because every person who hears this and improves their English just a little bit, that's what this whole channel is for. That's why I do this every single week. You are doing incredibly well. Seriously. The fact that you listened to this whole episode, that you stayed with all the stories and all the explanations and all the practice moments, that tells me everything about how committed you are to this journey. And I'm so proud of you for that. Keep going. Keep listening. Keep practicing. Keep showing up. English fluency is not a destination you arrive at one day. It's a road you walk every day. And every episode you listen to, every phrase that moves from your ears into your memory and out through your mouth, is one more step forward. I'm Alex. This is English in Fluency. Thank you so much for being here today. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep listening, keep learning, and never stop enjoying the journey.